Okay, welcome everybody. We're excited to have you here. This is a timely topics webinar with Capita Financial Network. We have Stephen Atkins on the line with us as well. He's from Polen Capital, and they are a portfolio manager. Many of you are familiar with them. They are a portfolio manager that we've used quite often in the portfolios. They focus on large cap or larger companies that have higher growth and exhibit, strong barriers around their market space and have competitive advantages. And maybe they tend to actually buy two different sets of stocks, kind of barbell approach, where higher growth with a lot of potential and then growth that is considered to be steady and safer and still growth companies, but those that will perform a little better through the ups and the downs of the market. So they performed well. We're excited to have Polen today. Today specifically, with everything going on in artificial intelligence, the goal was to bring someone on from Polen to help us all understand how that affects our portfolios, because growth stocks in particular are right intertwined with the world of artificial intelligence and what's happening right now. So anything else, Stephen, before we dive in that you feel like we should cover?
No, just want to confirm you can see the slide deck I put up
You
there.
see it. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I would say dive right in. We're excited to have
Okay,
you here and appreciate you spending some time with us. And
absolutely. No,
and it
thanks
would
for
be
it.
helpful for people to know. I mean, I know a little bit about, like, you're with Poland, but you're specifically in this space at Poland. So it would be helpful for people to know a little bit more about you and why
Sure.
why we're having you join us today in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm with Polen Capital. We're a boutique equity and credit manager based in Boca Raton, Florida. I sit on our large cap equity growth team. And on the team that I sit on, which is based in Boca, the team I sit on is a 12-person team and managing three strategies: a U.S. large cap growth strategy, a global growth strategy, and an international growth strategy. And so part of the part of why we wanted to bring this presentation to everyone today, it's one that we've used in some other client conferences and client meetings as well, and it's been pretty well received. Artificial intelligence is something that clearly dominates a lot of the headlines, particularly in the investment community over the past year or two, and certainly something that is becoming more and more impactful to the businesses that we follow in the large cap growth space, and hopefully over time more impactful to all of us as consumers, as the technology becomes more ubiquitous. So part of the purpose of the presentation really is to, I think, one, really provide sort of a base level background about artificial intelligence. We think there's some things that maybe are not as well understood about when you hear the term AI and what we're actually talking about. So a lot of the presentation is just to provide sort of a base level sort of understanding of what it is that we're talking about. And then there's some discussion about, the impacts that it may have on all of us, again, and the potential for the technology, but then also sort of, for us at least, real world impacts in terms of the portfolios that we manage and the businesses that may be both positively and negatively affected by artificial intelligence, and the opportunities that it potentially creates. So there's a few things that we'll hit on, but the first few slides are really meant to just provide sort of, like I said, sort of a base level understanding, and then we kind of go from there.
Perfect.
So we'll go ahead and get started. And what I'll do is skip past a few of these disclosure pages. And we're just gonna pull a definition of artificial intelligence straight from ChatGPT 4, one of the sort of the newest and most commonly known solutions for generative AI that we're seeing out in the marketplace. And basically, it is a simulation of human intelligence using machines that are programmed to think and learn like humans. And so, a lot of the tasks that AI performs are speech recognition, problem solving, decision making, language translation, because all of these tasks are very data intensive. They have an enormous amount of data involved in any of them. And really what AI models do is try to recognize patterns from this data and then use that to hopefully be able to create solutions that we can utilize in our everyday world. Um, so what you can kind of think about if you really think on a very, very long term continuum, right? Across centuries and centuries, AI in some ways is just the next iteration of our progress as humans. With the probably the most important thing to recognize is that the progress is speeding up, right? Whereas many of the most important innovations in the history of mankind have happened over the course of hundreds of years. We're now seeing innovations happen much more rapidly as technology advances. And so I think that's something that we all just have to get used to as humans. We're in a period now where it's good. I mean, these are things to be excited about, but at the same time, the changes can be daunting. And so we have to sort of recognize that and be prepared for that, because you're going to see those changes happen rapidly and more rapidly, I think, as we go over the next several decades. So it's something ultimately to embrace and understand, but at the same time, recognizing that it can be the change is so rapid, it's at times almost hard for us to sort of wrap our brains around how quickly we're advancing. But it is something that we're going to have to get used to. It's unlikely to slow down anytime soon. So just now moving to the next thing. Again, this is being a bit cheeky here with this slide, but I mean, it is true. I mean, what I said before about the innovations happening at a more rapid rate, it will start to inflect upwards. We're right at that point where we think we're starting to inflect upwards. But if we're able to really harness the potential of AI, it really should lead to some significant innovations that we'll all be able to benefit from in our lifetimes. Why is this happening now? So again, stepping back a minute, AI itself, the concept of AI is not new. It was first used in the 1950s. It's been speculated on at least since then by scientists and engineers, philosophers, men like Alan Turing. You know what the Turing test is, ability to differentiate between a human and AI. That's been around for decades. That itself is not a new concept. And we've actually been using AI, a lot of forms of AI, for several years now, for probably well over a decade. It's been probably more involved in your life than you even realize. But more recently, it seems to have really captured sort of the consciousness of everybody. And it's because you're sort of moving into what could be kind of the next phase of AI, which is called generative AI. And we'll get into the more details about that. But you're getting into just more advanced versions of artificial intelligence here. More recently, with ChatGPT being a good example of that. Why is this happening now? Well, it's very simple, in my opinion. It's happening now because we have the computing power that's required to make it happen. Um, AI is the most advanced computational programs that exist. So we've continued to advance along a timeline here over the past, say, 5 decades of increasing need for compute power to handle more complex tasks and more complex programs and software models. And you can only do that if you've got hardware, that sort of infrastructure underneath it that can deal with it. And it really is only in the past, say, decade or so that we've sort of advanced to the next phase of technology and infrastructure that's allowing us to now utilize AI models that are much more complex and require a lot more computational power. A good analogy, by the way, is the internet. And what I mean by that is, so there was a lot of excitement about the internet going into the mid and late 90s. And of course, we had the huge internet bubble forming in the very, very late 90s around that. And the promise of the internet was true. It was real. It was not a fabrication. It was something to get excited about. But one of the gating factors at that time was that it required a lot of infrastructure, right? To really harness the power of the internet, you needed a lot of fiber optic cables and high-speed broadband laid across the country. You need cell phone towers, and then ultimately the mobile handset technology to be able to utilize it on an everyday basis. we didn't quite have that in the late 90s and early 2000s. We were getting there, but we didn't quite have it in the way that we needed it. And so as a result, we sort of had excitement, but without the infrastructure to support it. And so then you had the bubble burst and then kind of a crash. But as things normalized, what we found is as we continued to build out that necessary infrastructure for the internet, and as we developed better mobile phones, better mobile phone technology, we were able to then realize the promise of what the internet held. And so I think something similar has happened with AI. Probably it would have been sooner that we have been using a lot of this AI related technology, but we didn't quite have the infrastructure that we required. Now we're finally getting to that point, and now it's unleashing all of these new AI applications that, again, hopefully will become more widespread in their use and helping us in our everyday lives.
How much of that sounds really cool. How much of the infrastructure do you think is built versus needs to be built to really unleash like generative AI even further?
So a lot of it is available now, but if you ask the hyperscale cloud companies like AWS and Microsoft and Google, they'll tell you that they're still capacity constrained. So they still need more chips and more data centers to meet demand. But in terms of having what we need to start really developing world-class AI applications, I think we're kind of there, very, very close to being there. I don't know. I don't have a good answer in terms of how much more we'll need. I think there's going to be a lot of demand for new data centers, really everywhere and anywhere, because not just because of AI, but because of just the continued shift to cloud computing, which is still, we think, in the relatively early stages. So there are going to be more data centers, and that comes with its own issues as far as energy usage and things like that. But in terms of the technology that we need to really start harnessing these really high computational AI programs, we're very close, if not already there.
Got it.
So this just gives you some context on ChatGPT, which again seems to have gotten the most traction as sort of the newest sort of generative AI application out there, and how quickly it's gotten to 100 million users. This obviously, this data is a little bit dated. It now has about 200 million weekly users, ChatGPT, which is about double than it was about a year ago. So it's still becoming much more widely adopted, but could still go a lot further than that. I mean, 200 million weekly users still is significantly lower than, say, something like Facebook, Instagram, which has well over a billion. So there's a lot further it could go, as long as the technology continues to improve and people are finding utility in it. All right, now I want to spend a few minutes on the next couple of slides. I think these are very important. This is what I talked about. That's important to have sort of a base understanding about AI and sort of what we're talking about when we talk about the different types of AI. The next couple of slides, I think, provide some of that clarity. So I want to spend a few minutes here. So
And
there's
Stephen,
multiple.
you
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
decide when you want to hit this, but this is a question that I think was coming no matter what, which is will history repeat? And will we get an AI bubble that will eventually burst? I would assume like later, as you talk about how
Sure.
the
Yeah, I'll definitely
implications
address
of all
that.
of this hit investments, we'll be talking about that. How far is the hype ahead of the reality? And is ChatGPT is known for its biases and hallucinations.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, I'll definitely hit on a lot of that.
Okay, we'll hold that one for whoever asked it, just because I think it'll make more sense as we hit more of the investment implications of this.
Yeah, definitely. So when we think about AI, there's sort of three basic types that I want to touch on. There's what they call narrow AI, and it's called narrow AI because it's very task specific. It's a constrained form of AI, and it's the most common form of AI today. It's really the only form in a lot of sense. Here, I'll make this a little bigger in case it's hard to
You saw
see.
me lean in.
Yeah, I saw you. All right. So
Yeah,
it's
thank
really the
you.
only form of AI that exists today is narrow AI. So it's task specific. In other words, you input all of this data into your AI model, and then the goal is that it's then going to analyze that data, tons and tons of data, and then produce whatever outputs that is that you're training it for, right? So good examples are, again, chatbots, autonomous vehicles, virtual assistants, any of those things that I think now are becoming more and more commonplace. Those are all basically forms of what they call narrow AI. Again, it's task specific and it's constrained to certain parameters that you're defining when you're creating the program. The next form is what they call general AI. That doesn't quite exist yet. That is something that is being worked on, though, and probably will come into fruition here in the next few years, where it really mimics human-like intelligence. So it would be less constrained because the idea is that then you'd be able to feed that AI just about any type of question or information, and then it would, just like a human, be able to interpret it and interpret it in any way possible, and then provide you an array of different outputs and solutions. Um,
How does that vary? Because, to those who aren't in this space as much, and we start asking ChatGPT questions, especially with GPT-4 and everything that it does, it it starts to make you feel like it's mimicking human-like intelligence. And so how is that different? I would say the ability of ChatGPT to be able to answer any question, might not always be right, but it's trying
right.
versus this middle box. How would you differentiate that?
Yeah, so it's probably an early form of it, but obviously, as someone noted in the chat, and probably we can discuss later, is it's obviously the accuracy is not always there.
Mm.
And so with general AI, what you should see is much higher levels of accuracy. And a situation where ideally, again, in a perfect form, you would not be able to tell whether you were talking to a human or not, right? I mean, you would not be able to differentiate between the program and human. It would have human-like intelligence. So any conversation you were having, you would not be able to tell the difference. And again, the accuracy of that information should improve dramatically.
Okay.
This is something that's being worked on by most of the large cloud companies right now. I think they'd all like to develop their own form of general AI. And I do expect that you'll see something from them, something like this from them, in the next few years. But it does not quite exist yet. And to be totally honest, Zach, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like when those models are essentially rolled out and Meta or Google or OpenAI says we've developed general AI. I really don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it will be something on par with human-like intelligence.
Got it. Okay.
And then the next form is more of a theoretical concept of AI, which is super AI, which is something that actually exceeds human intelligence. Again, this is something that's more theoretical. It may never actually exist, but is something that is theorized. So those are the three basic types. But when we're talking about AI, we're really talking about narrow AI. So I think that's just important to understand.
So
You know,
in the sense of speed and computational power, I think general AI can, and even narrow AI can outpace human intelligence, right? But so it's not just like the ability to do things quickly or compute, complex problems or algorithms. It's more of like thinking that theoretical super AI must be something even beyond speed and capacity, right?
right. Yeah. I don't even know what super AI would look like. It's probably something out of a movie,
Yeah.
and maybe something that we never want to find out,
Yeah. I
but
think
something
that's
that
actually
would
what people are most afraid of, by the way. Like I think
something that would obviously exceed
it
human
is
intelligence.
scary. Go ahead.
Could be a little scary, but we're not there yet. And again, that may never happen. Even
Okay.
just getting to general AI would be, a huge achievement in a lot of ways. Um, but within narrow AI, since that's really the only type of AI that exists, there's really two subtypes that I wanted to just talk about. And again, this is all just kind of making sure we have a sort of level set to understanding. There's what I would call predictive AI on one end, and then generative AI. Predictive AI is the most common form of AI. It's been around for years. Again, we use it in our everyday lives. Companies use it extensively at this point. You're basically, in very simple terms, inputting an enormous amount of data into an AI model, and then that model is trying to predict outcomes or behavior based on all this data and the different parameters that you've inputted. Great example would be something like fraud detection. which is something that probably everyone's very familiar with. So you have your phone, you get a text message from your bank saying that there's been a fraud alert on your account, suspicious activity, and then you have to confirm whether or not, this particular charge is from you or not, right? Or maybe you have to call them. That's predictive AI. That's what's happening, right? These banks have all of this data. They have all this transactions, millions and millions, really billions of transactions that they've got in this huge database. They have AI models scouring that data, and it's looking for weird behavior, right? So if it sees a charge on your card from a place that you don't live or normally go to, or a retailer that you've never shopped at, or for an amount that looks very unusual for you, it's going to flag it, and then you get an alert, right? That is predictive AI. Autonomous driving is basically predictive AI, right? If you've been in an autonomous vehicle, a Waymo or something like that, if you've ever driven in one, it has got all of this data that it's been inputted into its models about all the driving conditions around that area. And then it tries to predict based on all that information where you go, where there's a street, where there's a building, where there's a sidewalk, right? With all this data that's been inputted, right? So the idea is that you're dumping billions and billions and billions of parameters into these models, and it's learning this information and then using that to make predictions based on your output parameters. Again, so you've been using it, whether you realize it or not, you've been using it for years now. In many cases, predictive AI, and companies have been using it for years now. It is the most common form. The newer form that has started to capture everyone's attention is what they call generative AI. And the difference is that generative AI, rather than trying to predict something, it's trying to generate content based on whatever inputs you've given it. So a good example, of course, would be ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT has all this information that's been inputted into its model. You ask it a question. It doesn't know exactly what you're looking for, right? You're asking it a question, and it's trying to generate a response that it thinks is right based on what it is that you've asked it. And another good example would be newer image generative software like Dolly, right? So you see a lot of these now AI programs, and of course, a lot of these have people freaked out because it can lead to a lot of what they call deep fakes, where you see basically false images. So you ask the program, I want a picture of a horse and a cow going to the supermarket together in a Hyundai. Now, it doesn't know exactly what it is that you're looking for as far as that picture. It's going to generate a photo or some kind of image based on those inputs, and it's going to hope that it's what it is that you're looking for. That's fairly accurate. So again, it's more generative. It's not trying to predict behavior based on all of these inputs that you've given. It's trying to generate content based on what it thinks you're looking for based on your question. So it's a little bit different, and the accuracy is going to be lower, right? Since it's trying to kind of guess what it is that you're looking for, the accuracy is lower, which is why you have these issues with ChatGPT and whatnot, where the accuracy isn't always there, or the answer is incorrect. It doesn't know exactly what it is that you're always looking for. If you say, I want to draft a letter to my boss telling him why I deserve a raise, that with just all that to go on, it doesn't have much to go on. So it's going to draft a letter, and it's going to here's what I think you're looking for based on what you just told me. So, and that may be fairly close to what you're looking for or way off. But that's the difference. And that's the newer part of AI that started to come into being. And it should get better as these models improve and learn. They should get better. But that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about generative AI. It's a newer form. It's less accurate. And it's all about generating content based on a set of inputs. All right. I kind of touched on this already, but again, in terms of use cases, right? This is where you get these different use cases for AI, right? So, you got accuracy. It's sort of a degree of accuracy that you're going on. And so if you go into Airbnb or another travel website and ask for a travel recommendation, which you can do now, right? You can go in and say, plan me a vacation if I'm going to Tuscany and then to the south of France, plan meetings. Well, with those parameters, which are relatively specific, it can create sort of a travel recommendation that should be relatively accurate uh, in terms of what you're looking for. But then on the very other opposite end, again, if you want like a poem for school about some topic, some Shakespeare poem, you're going to get a much lower level of accuracy from the AI model. So again, you've got the more predictive use cases on the far right and the more generative use cases on the far left with generally lower accuracy. Over time, though, everything should move to the right, right? We should see generally higher accuracy from a lot of these models as they get better. A lot of different impacts. There's really very wide-ranging impacts for a lot of industries in terms of how they're going to utilize AI. Financial services is probably one of the more advanced right now. Automotive, obviously, fairly advanced with autonomous vehicles, technology within technology, software, hardware. There's been a lot of advancements, but we'll start to see that spread out. So areas like drug discovery should improve with the use of more AI models, energy management, automation. All these things should continue to get better. And you start to see the effects become more wide ranging across a greater number of industries over time.
And just for those listening, in our space, for example, before we dive into too much more, I use this as much as I can for organization. Like, for example, we present a lot on financial planning topics, and I've built my own. Inside Chat GPT, you can build your own GPTs, and I built my own GPT that basically requires the output. I've told it I want it to be an outline of a presentation deck that I can then give to my marketing team that they can put on our branded materials. And the output has to be like title, description, an idea for what the image could be or illustration could be, and presenter notes. So those four, and then it will not generate the outline until it's asked a certain number of questions that I've made it. I've told it you have to know how many slides. You have to know who the audience is. You have to have a rough outline of the content and the end goal of the presentation. And it will keep asking until it gets those things. And then once it gets those things, it spits out this outline for however many slides I told it to create. And then I copy that and send it in an email over to my marketing team, and they build the presentation for me. It's kind of insane at how great it can be at very specific things like that. Another quick example is many of you know I wrote a book called The 7 Prosperity Projects. I'm trying to create a GPT that has the content of my book as its brain, and then it asks the right questions to help people understand where they're at in the process and what their very next steps are in financial planning. But one of the problems with it is it's not a very good listener. So it like once you tell it like, hey, I want to know what to do with my money or my finances, it's like, great, you should start here. And it just starts giving you all kinds of advice. And I've told this software many times that you have to ask more questions and find out where they're really at. So that goes to some of the accuracy issues. Hopefully that just adds some context to what people are hearing and seeing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And again, to your point, Zach, the more parameters you give the AI model, the better output it'll probably get. So that's why I think, it says, well, I need to know the number of slides. I need to know the audience. I think the more you give it to work with, the more accurate it should become. So that makes a lot of sense. The next slide here, this maybe dovetails into the topic about, are we in a bubble? Is this a generative AI bubble? I don't know. It is entirely possible. Of course, it would be fairly consistent with other sort of what we call hype cycles, certainly with the late 90s internet being probably the most relevant one. So, it certainly would not surprise me if some parts of the market fell back to the extent that AI proved to be a little too far ahead of itself. Whether it is or now, it's really hard to say. If you talk to a lot of the companies, at least the companies that we speak with, they all very much claim that the demand is there. that they're seeing strong demand for these solutions, and therefore, in their mind, that there's no bubble. I think where there could be sort of a resetting, though, is we haven't really seen yet is what I consider to be a good set of what I call killer apps that really, really develop great use cases. We've seen a little bit with Chat GPT. That's certainly the closest that we've seen. But even there, Chat GPT at this point still lags way behind, say, Google search in terms of its usage. So it's far from sort of replacing Google search, and it may or may not ever do it. Um, and so that's a pretty good app, but maybe one that hasn't on its own really sort of changed people's lives. Now we know Apple is coming out with what they call their Apple Intelligence platform, which will start to be rolled out more and more on their iPhones, maybe not so much with the iPhone 16, but then, maybe with the 17 and beyond. Um, those could be within there. You could start to see some applications that start to get, broader usage and maybe ones that really become very, very popular with consumers. But the point being is that I think for it to really take off, you've got to see some applications, both consumers and enterprises, that really, really start to become widely used. And if you don't get that, if there's this period where for one reason or another, you haven't seen the usage take off as much as everyone expected, then you may find yourself in a period where you have too much capacity, where people will put too much money into AI startups. There's been too many NVIDIA chips sold, too many data centers built for AI purposes, and suddenly now you have too much. And then there's sort of a cleansing of the market. Again, you saw this in the early 2000s. I'm not making a prediction here. I'm simply saying that in order to really justify all the spend, you will have to develop some applications that really, really start to generate revenues. You've seen only a modest amount of revenue so far generated from a lot of these companies. And we know that OpenAI, for instance, is operating at a huge multi-billion-dollar loss. Obviously, that's not sustainable. They're going to have to turn profitable at some point. And so you're going to need real revenues from a lot of these new applications and big, large language models to start justifying the spend. So that would be your potential bubble scenario. If those revenues didn't show up, then there would probably be a resetting of the market, and that sort of trough of disillusionment you see on the slide would probably kick in at some point. We're not there yet, but that would be the sort of scenario that you're likely to see if it turns out to be a bubble.
That makes sense. Monetization of it all makes sense. Like you
Yes,
don't
you
have
have to see
that
monetization.
if they
These
can't.
companies aren't spending the money just for the sake of it. So you
Yeah.
got to see ROI here, an ROI on this spend. Now, I think this actually is a good relevant next slide that I'm going to get into, because this sort of now drills down to like how we actually see this at the portfolio level. And so again, I keep going back to the late internet, but to late 90s internet, but it really is very relevant. Um, in terms of the money coming in and who's generating the revenues, right now, the really vast majority of the revenues being generated for AI, especially generative AI, is at the hardware level. It's at the bottom level. And that's where NVIDIA and companies like NVIDIA operate, right? These are the companies selling the infrastructure layer, the hardware layer, to their various customers to help, of course, train and run AI models. So the chips that are required, all of the things that are the servers and networking equipment and the actual data centers themselves, the physical data centers, those are all required first before you can start really running big AI models. So the majority of the revenues being generated right now are at that hardware layer. And so the companies at that layer are probably the ones doing the best. And so again, NVIDIA would be the poster child for that. Not too dissimilar from what we saw again in the late 90s. It was, companies like Global Crossing and WorldCom and Cisco that were providing a lot of the equipment and the fiber optic cables that you needed to start laying across the country to start getting high speed broadband so you can get high speed internet access, right? You needed that first before you could really, get the value of the internet, right? Dial-up modems were not going to cut it. They were going to be way too slow to get really the real true value of the internet. You needed high speed broadband to be available. So a lot of the revenues were at least initially generated at that hardware layer, that infrastructure layer. But over time, what should happen is the revenue should start to move up the stack. And so what you should start to see is you're already starting to see cloud companies generate a good amount of revenue from AI related monetization. AWS talked about they're generating multi-billion dollars in AI related revenue. They didn't quantify it exactly, just said it was multi-billions in dollars. The cloud companies are going to be the sort of the layer above hardware where I think most AI developers are going to build their models. They're going to provide the tools and all of the servers and equipment that you need to build and run your models. So developers will build on top of the cloud companies. They'll be the hosts for all of this. And so they should be the next sort of layer to start monetizing if everything kind of goes according to plan. And then above them would be companies like Accenture, the IT services companies, and they'll provide the expertise to help you implement AI models, to help companies sort of figure out how they want to utilize AI and take advantage of it and get the most out of it. And then the final layer, which is actually where most of the revenue should be generated in the long term, is at the top, the software layer, the application layer, right? Those are going to be applications you're actually using, right? You're paying for in one way or another. You've got maybe you've got an annual subscription to something, whether it's ChatGPT, maybe it's Apple, and monetizing all of their AI applications and Apple Intelligence. Maybe it's an enterprise company, enterprise software company that creates, Microsoft Copilot, which is increasingly being used by a lot of people who use Microsoft Office to become more productive. At some point, someone should create, or there should be multiple applications that you are using in your everyday lives. And whoever does the best job of that should make a mountain of money over time. So,
So,
and so
real
that's what
quick.
happened with the internet. That I would think that's what's going to happen here with AI. Go ahead. Sorry, Zach.
Got it. No, no, that's great. Um, Thanks for putting a bow on that way. Okay, so I think for a lot of us, the very top of the pyramid and the very bottom of the pyramid feel very clear. Like, because we can touch, for those of us who are novices to the space, like we can touch both of those, right? Like the hardware, I could actually touch a chip or the servers or whatever, right? And then on
Mm-hmm.
the software side, we can see like I'm touching and interfacing with this software. Um, and I want to make sure I'm understanding the difference between the cloud layer and the IT services layer. It seems as though the cloud layer is really the more complex tech side of the computing power that's hooking up the hardware to specific tasks or goals. And then the IT services is where the Accenture type comes in and says, hey, you're trying to create this type of solution for an individual on the other side with your software. Here's the computing power and the software that hooks up to the computing power. I'm going to plug those two things together. Am I like interpreting that okay? Or help us understand the difference between those two middle rows.
Sure. Generally, that's correct. I mean, the way to think about the cloud layer again is to run these AI. So if we're any company that wants to create an AI model, and if we're an AI startup or any type of enterprise, company that wants to create sort of an AI-based application for, let's just say, for our employees.
Like the very top
Um,
of the pyramid is basically
yes,
somebody
top
who
of the
wants
pyramid.
something at the top of
So
this pyramid.
correct. So you're at the top of the pyramid. Well, and again, in order to run these models, whatever they happen to be, you're going to need an enormous amount of computing power in order to do that. So a good example would be OpenAI, which created ChatGPT. They need an enormous amount of computing power because they literally inputted almost every parameter. They literally inputted the internet into ChatGPT's model. They need
Hmm.
so much information. So in order to do that, you need an enormous amount of computing power. And you're not going to be able to probably build that or pay for that. To build that yourself, you're going to need to rent that, and you're going to go to the cloud companies to do that. They're the ones who are going to provide all of that computing power that you need. Um, as well as what other tools you might need to help run your models. So you're going to build on top of them. That's going to be the easiest thing for developers to do in particular. So companies, developers are going to go to they're already doing that. They're going to Microsoft, they're going to Amazon, to Google, and saying, hey, we need to build these models. We need access to all of your computing power. So that's that infrastructure layer. The layer above that would be the more human consulting layer. All right. So this is where, Accenture operates, and plenty of other companies do too, which is simply, again, this would mainly apply to large enterprises. We want to deploy AI. We don't know exactly how we're going to do it. Like if you're Exxon and you want to use AI in some way and you don't even know how, you're going to go to Accenture and say, hey, help us out. Help us figure out how we should utilize AI. Should we use it to lower costs, get more efficient? Is there some application we create for our employees to make them more productive? How can we use it? And Accenture is going to work with them to figure out how they want to develop it. Maybe they'll actually help develop some AI solutions for them, probably building on top of the cloud layer, and it's sort of just taking them along and helping them, in their sort of AI journey.
Got it.
So that's the way to think about that IT services layer. Most large enterprises need help, whether it was the internet, whether it was cloud computing itself and shifting from on-premise to the cloud. Anytime there's a big technological change, most companies need help figuring out how they want to take advantage of it. And that's where companies like Accenture come in.
Got it. Okay. So that helps lead into this question. How do you see monetization of AI? New revenues or efficiency in driving out cost in business?
Yeah, and it's a great point because we didn't really touch on that. I talked about software layer, and in a sense, you could say that they end up being kind of the same thing in a way, right? So what I mean by that is maybe there's AI applications that make you more productive, and by making you more productive, companies realize they could do more with less, right? So they're like, well, we have, everyone's using these new AI productivity tools that we created, and now they're able to get just as much done, and we don't need to keep hiring. So companies realize, wow, we don't need to keep hiring employees because now we can get everyone to be more productive with just what they have. Or of course, the more potentially bearish scenario is companies realize they can do the same with a lot less people because they have more AI applications. I don't know if that's going to be true or not. I think it depends on the company and the industry and just exactly how that plays out. I don't know that it's going to start displacing humans as much as we think. There's certainly certain areas, customer service areas that may get displaced over time. There's certainly, again, parts of the sort of supply chain, I guess you could say, that could get displaced, by, essentially more computers and less people.
Right.
So that exists. I don't know if it'll be more. I kind of see them as the same thing, like companies generating revenues. So, like in a sense, yes, many of the companies that are generating revenues from AI will be doing so because they're helping other companies save money and reduce their costs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm with you. So to like the way I look at this, to the person who asked the question and everybody else, the way I look at this is if you are in the business of AI, that's going to be new
Right.
revenue. That's going to be you creating new revenue for your business that before AI existed, you didn't exist. ChatGPT is a great example of that. Like without generative AI, there's no revenue to be had in that space. So to a certain degree, anybody in this stack, in this pyramid, is going to get new revenue associated with AI. There will be some businesses that open up like lines of business that are facilitated that they couldn't do before, but that are facilitated through AI. Like, I mean, give you an example. Maybe there's someday a financial advisory firm, which is part of the reason I test stuff out. But maybe there's someday a financial advisory firm that can make a completely AI-driven financial advisor who's maybe even more accurate and more consistent in their recommendations, right? So there's opportunity in all industries, and that could be a brand new line of revenue for a financial advisor firm. However, so that's kind of the answer is both. One is
Yes.
there could be new revenue. And then two, we're definitely seeing, even in our little practice, that we don't need as many, we don't need to hire as many new people. We have not let anybody go, and maybe that's us internally. And I think most businesses think the same way. It's like, oh, with this AI, we can just grow faster. And so everybody's looking at the opportunity more so than like, oh, let's cut a ton. Obviously, a recession would change people's perspectives on that, and they might look at cutting and using tools and technology to speed that up. But the bottom line is there's efficiency that's gained and therefore cost savings and growth, better growth at the same
Yeah.
costs and new revenues both
Yeah.
happening at once.
Yeah. And maybe, Zach, maybe I could just build on that. A good example in my mind would be autonomous vehicles. So let's just say we're able to get to a point where there's much more sort of widespread use of autonomous vehicles, right? Like right now they're being used, but in very limited fashion in some cities like San Francisco and Atlanta and a few others. But let's just say they become much more widespread, right? Well, so the manufacturers and the creators of the autonomous vehicles and their technology will make money, right? They'll monetize that, whether it's Tesla or Uber or Waymo through Google, or Google through Waymo, right? They will monetize those revenues by creating more autonomous vehicles that are used. At the same time, if we get to that point, if autonomous vehicles work in the way that we think they should, accidents should come way down, which means auto insurance rates should come way down, right? So you get to this sort of ideal scenario years from now, maybe decades from now, where you don't have much in the way of auto insurance because autonomous vehicles do all the driving and there's never any accidents, ideally, right?
Right.
So a huge cost saving that has huge knock-on effects for auto insurance companies, who I doubt anyone's gonna feel sorry for. Um, but obviously, massive revenue monetization for the AV manufacturers that
Yeah,
make,
but who
you know
knows?
what I'm saying?
Maybe the auto insurance companies are able to actually turn a better profit margin because claims are so low
Well,
that
that's
even
true too.
lower rates, maybe they're, I mean, those people are going to find ways to make money, Stephen.
Correct.
We
That's a great
found,
point.
right?
But see,
Okay,
so
so
that's like the two sides of it. There's a revenue
exactly.
monetization on one side and a massive cost saving on the other, if it works correctly.
Okay, so let's hit a couple of these questions, and then I would love to basically dedicate the rest of the time to the two questions that I see here, and then okay, really bring it home in terms of after that, bring it home in terms of okay, what does that mean for Poland in terms of investment decisions? Just for the sake of time, just so we make sure we hit that. So one of the questions was how many? Well, it says I know many big corps have at least begun to exploration of incorporating AI into their internal operations. So folks like Accenture are definitely getting work, but do you think that IT services layer is already doing actual AI or dressed up, hyped up, same old consulting and systems work? And if it's actual AI, is it generative yet?
It's a great question. The short answer is the very honest answer is I'm not totally sure. They don't really define. So, for instance, Accenture says that they're generating, I think, about 3 or 4 billion in AI bookings right now. But what is an AI booking? They don't really define that. Um, so is it generative or is it something else? It's probably a mix. There's probably some generative AI bookings in there. There's probably some more sort of traditional AI bookings in there. How they're defining it is it's I don't know, and it may be different from how some other companies define it. Again, AWS in their most recent earnings call said that they were generating multi-billion dollars in AI revenues, but they don't define what that means. Um, and so every company's probably different. So the short answer, I'm not sure. I really don't know. And most companies aren't saying how they're defining it yet. My guess would be it is some mixture of both.
Makes sense. Okay. And then what about specific sectors? The question was really, are there markets that are ahead of the general, like medical or engineering? I mean, that's usually what we call sectors. Are there specific sectors benefiting more from it and that are ahead of it?
Well, tech obviously, as not surprisingly, tech's probably the furthest along in both trying to monetize it and trying to utilize it. Um, so I would say tech probably the most obvious one. Um, Beyond that, I mean, I think financial services is an area where I think they see a lot of value, especially for the more predictive AI. So I think they see potentially a lot of value from that. Um, uh, Other area, I mean, we're the other areas that we're starting to see are areas that do a lot of customer service. So that could be everything from retail to payroll processing to like all sorts of areas, right? Because with customer service, um, what we're increasingly seeing companies run is what they call AI agents. And these AI agents are supposed to be sort of like virtual assistants that can respond to customer questions. You already sort of have that now, right? When you
The
know,
chat bots and
yeah,
the
like
yeah.
airline companies. I mean, they use it like the chat bots. So you're already using it to some degree. But what we're also seeing is companies utilize it internally to help retrieve information, to help route calls to the right departments,
Hmm.
to give their customer service reps better info so that they're more equipped to answer questions faster. We're seeing that roll out across lots of different types of companies. And so really anyone with a sort of a customer service arm to them is probably, already adopting some level of AI. Um, we're the pharma companies that we study are all utilizing it. They think it could help them with drug discovery, help them process and get through drug discovery and identify better drug candidates quicker. And then
Wow.
again, in an ideal situation, they're able to identify them quicker and then um, able, if they do their jobs correctly, those drugs then come to market at a higher rate. So they fail in trials less, ideally.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know, in terms of which companies or which areas are using it the most. Again, I would say, again, tech obviously, but then anything outside of that that has a lot of customer service facing activities, I think is starting to
Got
utilize
it.
it more. I may have a chart or something I can
No, that's
share.
great. That's perfect. So, okay, so with the time left, I would love to know, with this all as a backdrop, and you guys being in charge of picking, 20, 25 individual stocks for some of these portfolios, it would be really good to know how all of this affects your decision making in light of the fact that some of it could be overhyped or some of it could be an incredible opportunity. Differentiating between the two seems difficult. So how does all of this play into your investment decision making?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's tough to know sort of where the truth lies at times. I think one area that we've invested pretty heavily in is in the cloud companies. And so we own the four biggest cloud companies outside, basically, if you exclude China. So we own Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Oracle in our US strategy and our global strategy. And our feeling with the cloud companies is if AI becomes a thing, if it does become sort of what everyone's hoping it does, you'll need them. They should do well because again, they'll be the layer that everyone builds on top of. But even outside of that, if AI does not sort of become as big as everyone is thinking, you're still going to have to shift to the cloud. Companies are still going to shift to the cloud for lots of different reasons. And we think that's still in the relatively early innings. So those companies should still benefit just from that natural shift, even if AI becomes a disappointment. So we've looked at the cloud layer as being sort of the easiest, most obvious place to deploy capital. And then beyond that, I think we're looking for software companies that we think can monetize. That includes Apple, by the way, companies that can potentially monetize through at the top of the pyramid at the software layer.
Is
We have
it
not invested as much in the hardware layer. That's been a mistake. Clearly, that's been the area of the most benefit, but we have not invested there as much at this point.
So is it fair to say it feels like to me up at the top at the software level, you'll have more polarized winners and losers. Like there's a much like you mentioned cloud, like even if they don't use it to build the AI infrastructure on, I mean, it's still important for business to have that centralized document storage and data together to be able to access it. So I'm curious to know, it feels like as you get higher up on this pyramid, if it's not a big company, you can really lose big, even if AI does well. That happens in Bitcoin too. Like Bitcoin, the price of it did fairly well, and then there are tons of companies that just died along the way. I'm trying to look out for our clients a little bit as to where the biggest
Yeah.
pitfalls might be.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I mean, there will be losers. Companies that aren't able to adapt or just are not able to monetize it as effectively for one reason or another. Yeah, it could be losers. For every Apple, there's a Nokia. Right. So if, some companies could, if they don't adapt, they could get left behind, or maybe they try to, they spend a lot of money trying to create, AI, an AI application. It just doesn't hit with consumers or whomever. So yes, I mean, there's going to be losers.
Have you guys looked at
It's hard to
any?
know. It's hard to know
Okay.
who those are going to be at this point.
Have you guys looked at any AI specific companies where they're not very diversified, meaning very like their whole business is some sort of this supply chain of AI? Like Apple obviously is all over the map with hardware and software and subscription and everything, right? And same with all of the cloud layer. Have you looked at anything that's just AI?
Not really. I don't think that we've looked at any company that whose sort of potential future success, rests solely on AI becoming that would be open AI. Like if
Yeah.
open AI was public, then that would be probably the closest thing that we might look at. A company whose existence is predicated on the success of some generative AI applications. No, I don't
Yeah.
know. We haven't looked at any companies like
Well, and
that.
knowing your investment thesis around profits and being profitable and being smart and prudent with money, I think OpenAI would probably be a pretty hard investment for Poland
Correct.
to buy, right? Given billions of dollars of losses.
That's
Um,
right. That's
that's
right.
interesting. Okay, that this has been so good, so wonderful,
Oh,
and I
so yeah.
appreciate you. And I know we made it through. Looks like about half, but I really think it was really helpful for people to understand the basics of this and to understand the investment ideas around it. So I do appreciate you spending time with us and helping our Capita customers understand it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it,
Yeah,
man.
thanks, Stephen.
Okay.
Thank you,
Take care.
everybody.